Hi and welcome. I'm Phil Klein, your host, and I'm here today with Ron Carucci, who is a business author and an extraordinary consultant who has worked for many decades now, understanding dynamics of power, trust, loyalty, and other aspects of leadership and organizational transformation. Ron, thank you so much for joining me today.
Phil, what a treat. Thanks so much for having me.
So great to be with you. So Ron, you have specialized in organizational transformation. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and how an organization knows when it's ready to transform or ready to begin that process?
You know, Phil, most organizations don't know it until they're in a lot of pain. Many organizations would anticipate they need to transform, some competitive requirement, a regulatory requirement, a competitor's disruption, a technological disruption, some hurling meteor coming at them, or some opportunity, some unmet demand by the people they serve, their customers or their suppliers, or a new way people are discovering how to use their product or service. Whether it's opportunistic or defense, many companies don't know that they're in need of transformative work until they're in a lot of pain or they're in a ditch. And then they start pulling frantically on the same levers they like to pull on. And when those stop working, suddenly they acknowledge, well, I probably need help. And it's unfortunate. I think that rare is the leader who can anticipate the need to rethink their strategic identity. Who are they in the world? The culture of the organization has become stuck or stale or too fear-induced or too slow or too bureaucratic. Their structures are bloated or are outsized. They grew fast. They had the classic, they're the classic teenage boy in his dad's suit. They grew, but they didn't scale. They're like the $100 million company trapped in the body of a $30 million organization. Whatever the conditions are, the need for change probably happened a while back. It's that moment where you realize on the way to Indiana and the sign says, "Welcome to Ohio," and you miss the exit and you don't know where you missed it. So it's usually a rude awakening like that provokes the need to say, wow, we need to change something here. And many leaders don't know what to grasp for. So they do the classic, let's redo the business plan, or let's rewrite the mission and values, or let's nip and tuck the org chart and do the classic bad reorg, or let's put in some new technology platform to make things more efficient, or let's run everybody through a training program on our new corporate philosophy, or all people are marching down the whole purpose washing field where we all want to look like we have some goodwill behind our brand. Whatever it is, they often reach for cosmetic or superficial levers of change rather than doing the deeper work, to actually fundamentally transform. It's no different than the person who says, I really want to lose weight, and they buy a gym membership and a bunch of carrots, and that's it. But they actually don't exercise and eat better.
So let's delve into this a little deeper in terms of the research that you've been doing and what you've learned recently about what kind of organizational change matters and what patterns you've been seeing in companies that have embraced that effectively.
So the latest research from my upcoming book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose, was based on a 15-year longitudinal study with more than 3,200 interviews with leaders from around the world to look at under what conditions will people and organizations tell the truth, speak up, treat others fairly and with justice, and do the right thing, and act and serve a greater good. So basically, under what conditions will people say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason, which is our definition of honesty. You may do one or two of those things, and people will consider you good-hearted or well-intended or committed to results, but you have to do all three to be considered honest. I wanted to know, we have to stop blaming the individual actors, right? 5,000 people didn't wake up one day, all on the same day at Wells Fargo and decide, hey, here's an idea on how to increase sales. So what are the systemic factors? What are the conditions under which we turn otherwise good-hearted, honest people into liars and cheats? And if we knew those, could we prevent it? Could we counteract those conditions by creating organizations that people want to tell the truth in, that they want to do the right thing? So that's what the research revealed, and we found that there are four conditions. At least I'm sure there are others, but we found four predominant predictors of the moments in which people will either tell the truth or not, or distort it, or withhold it, where they'll do the right thing and treat others with dignity and fairness, or where they'll act self-servingly. and when they'll silver grade a good or put their own interests first. And so having understood those, we can now say to leaders and organizations, if you want, and by the way, all the research indicates that companies that truly are genuinely purpose-driven, that do create a place for people's voice, that do allow justice to happen in people's in accountability systems, are 16 times more likely to have people do the right thing and say the right thing, and they outperform their competitors on every possible indice, stock performance, customer retention performance, profitability, long-term growth, EPG growth. Every metric tells us that the more honest companies are the higher performing companies. So not that you should become more honest in the interest of your own performance, but know that if you really are interested in being a good and honest company, the market will reward you for that.
Can you walk us through a specific example of where all of these elements are present and how they came to be so?
So the fun part about the book is that it's not a book about the villains. I didn't want to write about Wells Fargo or Volkswagen or Theranos. I wanted to write about the exemplars. I wanted to write about the leaders who really are doing it right, who are people we want to emulate. And so I found a plethora of wonderful organizations who are by no means perfect, but are doing wonderful things in these areas. So Hubert Joly, the former CEO of Best Buy, who took over at the helm maybe 8 or 9 years ago, when they were at the brink of bankruptcy. And Hubert set their transformation in motion by declaring that we will do well by doing good. That they were not there to sell TVs and refrigerators. They were there to help people solve real problems and to transform lives through technology. And so he began by visiting dozens and dozens of stores and listening to employees and listening to customers and really creating a place where people and employees could thrive. And one of the very first things they did was give people permission to price match. It was a very simple thing, but people were coming into the stores, looking at products and leaving and going and ordering things online because they couldn't match a price. So he empowered everybody to say, if people can want to buy it here, match the price they got. But more than that, what he did was he studied employees and he asked scores of employees on the floor, when are we at our best? When are we at our most humane? When are we at our most caring? When are we really transforming lives? How do we replicate that? And he engaged all the employees on the floor in the process of defining the standards of best. And they learned tremendously. People got to tell their stories and share their pains and first and foremost, be human. To be facing off with a fellow human being who had a problem or a need, and helping change their lives. So now Best Buy is doing things in healthcare, and they're doing things in disadvantaged neighborhoods to bring technology to underserved communities. The stock price went from about $11 a share to about $100 a share over the time that Hubert was in the organization. And they've been on most admired companies to work for, best places to work. They've made lots of lists. And Hubert himself was declared one of the most effective CEOs in the world. It was a grueling transformation. But it began with a leader who decided he wanted to do well by doing good.
So how did he kind of go against what would have been either the headwinds or the potential risks of alienating employees or hearing things that were expressed that he didn't want to hear, or how do they avoid the obvious kinds of pitfalls that you might encounter when really trying to do an organizational change initiative of that breadth and scope?
Well, probably the greatest risk he faced was that he took over from the founder, right? So, and the founder was still present and on the board and had strong opinions and still had a heavy hand. And so I think Hubert's ability to manage him and build a relationship with him of trust and win his favor, but still being able to make the transformation he needed to make so that Best Buy could survive and thrive, I think that was probably the most difficult part of it. He's a courageous leader, and he's so warm and good-hearted. I don't think he was afraid at all. I think for him to lead as he would naturally lead, he had to align the organization to the values he wanted to bring. As an example, when they first started managing performance, and he got he got invited into their performance appraisal process with forms and numbers and charts and checkboxes, and he just was so confused. He thought, how is this helping anybody? I don't understand why I would fill these forms out. These are people who report to me. Why wouldn't I just ask them how they're doing and ask them to tell me what they need from me and talk about what their accomplishments have been? Why would I fill out these forms? It was so inhumane and bureaucratic to him and demeaning to him. He recognized that it was not a process of accountability at all. And so he didn't use them. He simply engaged people in meaningful conversations about their contributions and about what they needed support in and where they needed to grow and develop. And again, continue to, through his own actions. And yes, when you're the CEO, your actions do speak loud. And so he was able to send lots of cues and model for the organization the kinds of leadership and the kinds of transparency and the kinds of accountability he wanted to imbue into the culture.
You mentioned honesty is a collective muscle. Can you talk a little bit about how it's a collective muscle and how something like that needs to propagate throughout an organization and how it does across different organizational elements and different types of roles that are in a company?
So let me start by answering that with what the 4 findings of our research were. That'll help me get specific about your question. So the first of the findings was honesty and identity. Be who you say you are. Every company has a mission, a vision, of values, and for many employees, they roll their eyes when they see those. The assumption is those are for the walls, not the halls. They're a cosmetic set of language that we use to tell people what we think we are, but what happens in reality is something different. If you ask a set of employees, do you live by these values? Do your leaders live by these values? You might get well, some days, or no. So the problem with that is when your statements of identity, your brand promises, your mission, are for cosmetic consumption only. You have now institutionalized duplicity. You have now said to your entire base of employees, at this company, we say one thing, but we do another. And when that's the case, you are 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their interests first. But when your actions and words match, in other words, when people believe that they are expected to and enabled to embody the words you say, now you're 3 times more likely to have people tell you the truth, be fair, and serve a greater good. The second finding was about accountability. So when your accountability systems are seen to be just, to have fairness in them, meaning that when people feel like their contributions are talked about with dignity and with honesty, you're now 4 times more likely to have people be fair and honest and serve a greater good. But when people feel like their contributions are demeaned, are neutralized, are talked about unfairly or judged unfairly, now they feel entitled to take. They feel hurt and demeaned, and now you're 4 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and be selfish. The third finding was transparency in governance. In other words, are your decisions sound, and do people understand them? And in the meetings, your governance processes, where those decisions are made, is data transparent? Or is it orchestrated theater? So when people are engaged in decisions that they have to carry out, do they know what part they played in making them? Do they know how they were made? Or was it a ruse? Did you come in and make it look like they were part of a decision that you already made? And is the information they need to make decisions you expect of them available to them? Or do they have to hunt it down in the rumor mill or underground? If there's transparency in the conversations where key decisions are made, you're 3.5 times more likely to have people tell the truth and serve a greater good. And lastly, probably the most surprising finding in the data was border wars. How do your organizations, the pieces of your organization work together? At the seams of your organization, where the silos come together, are the seams stitched? Can people build bridges between functions and work collaboratively across borders? Or are there border wars? Do sales and marketing work well together? Does R&D and operations work well together? All the places where you see classic, silo warfare, how are those conflicts being managed? When there is cohesion in your organization, in other words, when the fragments of the organization are made into a whole, you're 6 times more likely to have people tell the truth, act fairly, and serve a greater purpose. But when you have border wars, in other words, when we have dueling truths across these borders, you're 6 times more likely to have people lie and cheat and serve their own interests. And the statistical models are cumulative. So if you can do all 4 of those things well, you now up your odds by a factor of 16. You are 16 times more likely to have people tell you the truth, behave justly toward one another, and serve a greater purpose. Otherwise, you're 16 times more likely to wind up in a headline story in a newspaper you never wanted to be in. So what the sum total of those things is the definition of honesty as truth, justice, and purpose. And what I learned is that it's not a character trait, Phil. It's a muscle. Being good at honesty in those four domains requires you have to work at it every day. It's a muscle. And those, as you can see, those are systems muscles. Yes, the individuals in the organization have to sort of contribute to those and participate, but there's systems in your organization. There's systems of how you align your words and actions. There's systems of how you honor the contributions of others. There's systems in which you move information to make decisions. And there are systems that bring together pieces of the organization into a greater whole. And so that's what I mean by a collective muscle. To be good at that, you actually have to work at it every day.
Wow, that is quite a lot to digest, but you do put it in a very compact, beautiful package. So when companies start to do this, they are seeing the challenges in each of those areas and beginning the process to systematically address each one. What are the first few indicators that they're on the right track, or that things are a little on the more wobbly side in terms of addressing this? Because most companies do have those brand promises and so on, but they are those in name only, as opposed to truly modeled in the company. And people's individual purpose may align to some degree with the company purpose, but people also have very different purposes. And different parts of the organization, they are on competing visions. They have different objectives and so on. So I can see that the fraying is kind of almost inevitable in the systems. And that's where I see the idea of a muscle developing being very powerful, because it is that, residual, or let's say ever-present, perhaps even potentially ubiquitous strength, muscular strength, that is what it would take to address these. And something like justice is something that you don't hear a lot of people talk about as a company principle. Perhaps you could, share a little bit more about that one in specific, as it relates to, how a company might implement justice in relation to its bottom line targets, for example.
Sure. Let me address the first part of your question first. So the good news in our models is that it's not all or nothing. Right, so what our statistical model shows is that a little bit of improvement goes a long way. So if you can close the gap between your actions and words, even by 10-15%, you can improve truth telling and honesty by 20%. Right, so you don't have to be perfect at all these things. And I tell leaders, because many leaders, depending on where they sit in the organization, can look at these findings and go and feel helpless and feel like I don't control these things. I'm not the arbiter of these systems. I can't change it all. And I want to empower them to say, but you control some of it. You control it within your own world. So here's a simple way to start. Take your company mission, take your company values, take one statement of your brand promise, or take one element of your company's state identity into your next meeting. Put it out on the table and say, guys, let's talk about how well are we living this? In our work on a daily basis, in my work as your leader, where is this present? Where do we do this? And where are we falling short? Where could we do better? Just bring it into the conversation and let people actually talk about it and beat it around. That's a very simple way to start, and begin to recognize where people, and by the way, if people are silent and they're too fearful to talk about the truth, they're telling you that your leadership sucks. They're telling you that you have not made it safe for them to have that conversation. So that gives you some feedback about where to go start when it comes to transparency and creating a culture of voice and creating a culture of engagement. When it comes to justice, fairness, you'll recall that in the TED Talk I got to work with you on, I talked a lot about justice was one of the topics we discussed. And when people feel wronged, when people feel something, when you hear the words, that's not fair, be on high alert, because that's telling you somebody now feels entitled to take. In an economy years ago where outputs were common, where people were producing the same service, repeatability was a goal, the same product. The accountability systems that documented and evaluated those contributions were more standardized. And that worked fine. But today we have confused sameness with fairness. We've tried to scale sameness and made it unfair. Because today's work is not repeatable outputs. Today's work, people's remit to the organization is as unique as they are. People are being paid today for their ideas, their analyses, their insights, their creativity, their imagination. That's people's remit. We used to say that, don't be you're not your job, that you should separate who you are from what you do. But today that's not possible. Who we are and what we do is more fused than ever. So whenever I talk about your contribution, I'm automatically talking about you. And if I treat that contribution without dignity, if I treat it as if it's an output, and I don't understand that the contribution is a reflection of who you are, that's unfair, that's unjust, and I walk away feeling unseen. Our performance management processes, all of our documentation processes are all litigation avoidant. They're all dehumanizing. We've taken dignity and fairness out of them, and fairness has to accommodate individuality. So leaders need to bring dignity and an understanding of individuality back into the work of discussing contributions. I have to understand that who you are and what you do are inextricably linked, and I have to treat them that way. That requires more of me as a leader. I have to work harder to make the intimacy with you more trusting, that you trust your development to me, that you trust me with those gifts to help you make them better. There's no one size fits all anymore. I can't treat my team as if it's my team. And I can't keep using the excuse, well, I can't show favoritism. I have to treat everybody the same. Well, treating everybody the same isn't fair because they're not the same. And in today's economy of ideas and knowledge, they're really not the same. You can treat everybody as an equal human being with respect, but you can't treat their contributions the same. And we make it worse when we grade people, right? So at the end of our performance appraisal, people get put in a category. You're a 4, you're a 3. And it's so offensive. I had one client months ago, begin our coaching session with, his neck was red. She gave me a 3. I'm always a 4. In other companies, I'm a 5. How can just because she's got a quota of 3s, I get demoted? Well, he wasn't demoted. It took me an hour to get him off that ledge. He had lost all objectivity about himself, about his work, and about his boss because he got pegged with a number. And actually, neuroscience studies show that when our amygdalas get triggered, when we get categorized, even if it's a good category, we get triggered. We feel unseen, unknown, and we feel unsafe. We literally feel like our destinies are no longer in our control when we get put in a category. And so our accountability systems have just lagged, and they've evolved to be unjust because they treat everybody as if fairness and sameness were the same thing.
Wow. And, in a way, now that many of us are working from home or in remote situations, the whole notion of really seeing oneself and one's workplace as connected is probably more true than ever. At the same time, there are those needs to establish boundaries between our work and our personal lives. How do you see that playing out? And how can we bring ourselves more to our work while allowing you modeled it when you gave us an example of, wow, the feedback that I might be getting as an employer could be that I suck in the way that I'm doing certain portions of my job, and being able to integrate that kind of criticism when I'm bringing my full purpose and my full self to the workplace it's a different arena than many people play at work. And so that generates a bunch of new opportunities, perhaps for challenge, but possibly for something else as well.
Well, I think for much greater performance and a much more meaningful experience, right? So first of all, I think the boundary issue is really important because we're in a pandemic. So now you can no longer say people's personal lives aren't relevant to you because you're seeing their dirty laundry right in the screen. You're seeing their kids come running in from trying to do schoolwork. So we bring our personal lives to work, and it's exhausting. And so a leader's compassion and empathy and patience is far more required today. It's just the reality of being in a pandemic. But now the boundaries are more ours to own, right? I can't expect my boss to be with me. If I need time away, if I need, one of our clients is now forcing their people to take a day off every 10 days. They cannot be on screen, they cannot be online. They are forcing people to step away because they know their mental health is fragile and people are working all the time. So, organizations can certainly help people set those boundaries, but we have to make sure we took our commutes away and we just added more hours to the workday. And so our brains are just fried. So the work-life balance thing takes on also a unique thing when it comes to the pandemic. But the issue of purpose is an important one. Satya Nadella at Microsoft is a great example of this. When he took over the helm there, one of the most wonderful things he did was he took his executive team off site to a much more casual place. They were sitting on couches, not at a fancy conference table. They were very casual. And he said to them, we're going to go around and you're all going to talk about this, but you no longer work for Microsoft. Microsoft now works for you. How is Microsoft going to be your platform to live out your purpose in the world? Why are you here? And what unique fingerprint are you going to leave on the world? And how is Microsoft going to help you do that? And he made each of them go around and talk about that. And what a profound flipping of the script. Every leader can ask that of people. Tell me how this role, this team, this cubicle, how is this an expression of who you want to be in the world? How is this helping you leave the fingerprint on the world you want to leave? And some people haven't answered that question for themselves. And so then you as a leader ought to help them. Because if their why is clear, their impact will be greater and their work will be more fulfilling and it'll be higher quality. So it's in your interest as a leader to want to know what is somebody's why behind their what. And if you haven't asked, ask. Create a safe space where people can actually bring that question to the table. And if they need help figuring it out, get resources, bring in help and support. Have people explore that question of what is the unique reason I want to be in this world? What's the mark I want to leave on the world? How does this work? What did I fall in love with when I started this work? And by the way, if I've fallen out of love with it, why have I fallen? And what can I do to fall back in love with it? This is all the material of great leadership these days. It's no longer intrusive. It's necessary for you as a leader to know the answer to those questions, because if you're going to create the conditions in which people can thrive and become their best selves and do their best work, those are questions you no longer have the luxury of not knowing.
Ron, thank you so much. This has been a tremendous journey through understanding a little bit of your window into how companies are working and how they can work better for each and all of us. Ron, thanks very much. If you have a final thought, I'd love to hear your closing words. Anything you want to make sure you leave us with?
Well, Phil, it's certainly been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me and the chance to talk about something that is so near and dear to my heart. And for all of your listeners, I would say we can all do better. The world is crying for a more honest and just place to contribute. People want to live lives of purpose. And if you are a leader, no matter how small your influence is, whether you're leading a little league team or your family or a small mom and pop business or a corporation, you have the power to make the world more truthful, honest, and just. So do it.
Thank you.